Morning, everybody. This is Tenable, and I am Leslie Forbes. I'm a sales engineer with Tenable, and this is what we get involved in. Now, you might be saying, yeah, Tenable, malware, Nessus, how does that all add up? And where are you guys coming from? So what we'd like to talk a little bit about today is where we are coming from and also where we're going, and how together all of these technologies can aid an enterprise in dealing with the ever-increasing malware challenge. And towards the end, I will try and visualize how we do this from an enterprise point of view, so that you can go away with perhaps a vision, perhaps a view of how we do these things, and even more importantly, how we can make good use of, well, the tools that we have. So let's delve into this thing. Let's take a look first at some stats and where these things are coming from. So this summary chart comes from the Verizon DBIR, which is fairly authoritative, really, in the sense of the broad scope of where these threats are at. So yes, we can see there were in 2013 about 63,000 incidents. Now, an incident has to be distinguished from a breach. Of those, 1,367 resulted in breaches or what you see data disclosure. So that's about, what would you say, 2%? Even though we could just say, well, that's a very low percentage, even one breach can be devastating for a company and be talked about in the media forever after. So what we can look at is the sort of topness of all of this. Top 4 attack categories that resulted in breaches were obviously point of sale intrusions, web attacks, cyber espionage, card skimming. So yeah, lots of very interesting challenges. So if we just think about what we mean when we talk about an incident, it's just an event really that compromises the integrity, confidentiality, or availability of an information asset. Whereas a breach, I said there was a distinction. It's an incident, which we've just defined, that results in the disclosure or potential exposure of data. And what's a data disclosure? Well, it's a breach for which it was confirmed that data was actually disclosed to an unauthorized party. So think of data exfiltration. So those just paint a very clear picture of what organizations are faced with when it comes to dealing with all of these massive amount of challenges and attacks against the organization. So clearly, what we can see is web application is the greatest attack surface, probably the most visible of all of these, and certainly one where we see a lot of activity from businesses trying to secure their, could I say, cyber real estate, where they're trying to make sure that the websites, plural, that they've put up are indeed secure and that they can transact business on those sites. So it's also the easiest way for threat actors to go into a business by knowing that they're going in there in the first place, and in the second place, knowing typically that there is some valuable asset behind that front end. The vast majority of websites nowadays are dynamic by their very nature, and almost, you could say, directly connected to some form of transactional database. And transactional, I mean, we'll take your money and we'll give you something for it. So if we can break into that website, well, isn't that marvelous? Yay, we've got some free product, we've got some information about users, we've got some information about customers, we've got some information about the crown jewels of the target company. So very good reason for hackers to want to delve into that kind of thing. Now, the question is, how do organizations detect these things? That's the real question. And we all know, and I think that organizations know, that it takes time. It takes time for organizations to be alerted to these problems. And, well, I guess that based on what Mandiant has reported, 33% of victims discovered it internally, which means that 67% were told about it from somebody else. So the time for earliest evidence of compromise to discovery of breaches are typically 229 days. So clearly, security processes and controls not working efficiently, or even broken, you could say. And in many cases, in some of the recent very large public exposures of breaches, or disclosures of breaches rather, the evidence is there that, well, we were told about this, but well, we chose to ignore it, or we just didn't understand the signs, didn't understand the warnings, which way to turn. So these sort of things should be into the DNA of the business. Anyway, let's take a look at how this IT process typically works from the discovery, knowing about vulnerabilities, dealing with the threats, and processing them into something that is more useful. What we can see before we just delve into that is that this statistic is actually improving. So where we say 33% discovered it internally, that's down from 37, which is interesting. So perhaps there's a little bit of an element of challenge there. However, the one that I was specifically referring to is the 229. That's 14 days less than 2012. So, you know, I think that what we're saying here is the tools that businesses have in place are improving, and also the number of businesses that are reporting is also increasing. So we're getting a clearer picture of all of these threats, incidents, breaches, and reports. So let's have a look at how these security processes work. Now, this is the most important thing. Now, there's this concept of proactive and reactive. So the top half of what we're talking about here is what we do proactive. We go and discover vulnerabilities. These are dealing with known vulnerabilities. So in football terms, you could just say defense. And right at the bottom there, we're talking about the threats. And this is the reactive approach. And in dealing with known or even unknown threats, we're talking about as opposed to defense. So when it comes to understanding vulnerabilities, we have to know where things are at. We need to discover all of these assets. We need to go and audit them, make sure that they're up to scratch, patched up, configured correctly, and so on. That involves then detecting the vulnerabilities against these targets, and even monitoring change. So it's fine to have all of these change control aspects in the IT delivery process, but if that's not defined with the rest of this loop, if you could call it, the discovery, the auditing, the detection, then change control is almost broken by itself. It might be a backstop, but it's broken. These are the cycle of things that we need to talk about in order to complete our view of how we deal with malware and malware action. So let's look at the other side. In dealing with threats and potential incidents, we need to be able to identify stuff. We need to be able to identify when things have changed. So with thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of events a day or an hour even in very large businesses, how are we going to see where things have changed? How are we going to identify something which is abnormal? Once we start doing that, we could identify threats and attacks. So what's a threat? Well, a threat might be a connection from a known command and control server. It might be a known piece of malware. It might be a piece of malware which is polymorphic and has changed its signature. But we want to have the heads up on that. And where are all these sources coming from? How do we get about those things? And once we have all of that in place, we need to go sifting through that. To go in and perhaps looking backwards, whether there's been a breach or not. With all of that in place, we can then respond to a breach, respond to an incident. Now, what's the response going to be? You could say locking the stable door after the horse has bolted, but that's kind of the big picture. We need to understand what's been taken. We need to understand where it's gone. We need to understand how they did that. We need to cycle around and figure out what it was that caused this problem in the first place. So in many situations, it's having enough information to hand to know what's gone on. So if we're not logging, if we've not got any visibility of all of these assets, how on earth are we going to track all of this stuff? So when we talk about proactive measures, these are the things that we want to be doing smartly all the time. Now, SMART in that sense is an acronym. You know that one: specific, measurable, achievable, and all those kind of things. So that's the important thing about being proactive, is we need to be smart about it. And it's not just a matter of saying, well, okay, we're going to go and we're going to use WSUS today, and we're going to go and patch up all of our servers. That's a good step forward, but how are we going to measure that? How are we going to make sure that we've got all of these servers patched in an appropriate amount of time? How are we going to be certain that there are not other systems which are not part of this, let's just call it Active Directory visibility, because that's where WSUS works, isn't it? What about routers? What about Unix systems? What about Linux systems? And what about hardware? What about network infrastructure? And what about that telephone system stuck in the corner there? How are we going to know that those are security if we don't know where they are in the first place and can't audit them in the second place and detect vulnerabilities and therefore know what's changed? That's a big challenge. So The other aspect, of course, that we're talking about here is that in the reactive sense, we need to have a clear, defined path on how to deal with these kind of unusual things. What I said in the beginning was we need to know what's changed. If we can't have a baseline on where we're at in the first place, how are we going to be able to measure what's changed? So this is what we're getting at, is that in this ideal world, this is a beautiful picture. Nice, clear, proactive measures, and nice defined reactive processes. But there are gaps. There are gaps between these defined areas, if you want. Defined between, could you say, the security guys and the ops guys. So the vulnerabilities, we're trying to discover where these things are at. And silos of data still exist. Silos of expertise exist. And very often there's not any kind of, could you say, broad coverage. And very often the tools that are in place for doing these tasks, finding the vulnerabilities, understanding where the threats have come from, indicating where the breaches have happened, some of those tools just aren't efficient or just aren't there. Many times when we engage with customers, we understand that they're on the starting blocks of this kind of identification or this kind of definition of process, finding the vulnerabilities, finding the processes, finding what's changed, knowing how to deal with finding that kind of data. So these gaps do exist, and what we're trying to do here is narrow the scope between, or narrow the gap between the security folks and the operations guys. So in the desktop sense, very often there are just different groups of people. There are different groups of challenges. There are different risk levels, and the big challenge is that with this "bring your own device" mantra, the problem is that when data exits an organization onto my laptop, that's fine. We can know about that because I know that my laptop was connected to the corporate network. But when I'm downloading mail to my phone or to my iPad or whatever, who knows about that? And how much IP, intellectual property, how much of that is inside of my device? What happens if that gets lost? What about all the presentations that I take and go and visit customers with? These are the challenges where we're talking about silos of data. Now, we have to acknowledge that data does not exist only inside of my business. This cloud subject is massively bigger than what most businesses care to admit. And the vast majority of customers that we visit talk about data in the cloud. Processing. What does cloud mean? Well, cloud seems to have taken on a very, very, very broad concept. But when I say cloud, just think somebody else's computer. It's that simple. Somebody else's computer. So if I'm putting sales data or my source code onto the cloud, big GitHub or something like that, that's somebody else's computer. Would I randomly go and plug my USB stick in with all my personal documents? Would I randomly go and plug that in somebody else's computer? I'd make dotty sure first that he's got some kind of security on there. But way, but this is where I'm going, is silos of data exist where sometimes we don't even know. So how do we know who's been talking to whom and where that traffic has been going to and from inside of our network? So what here is, very often it might be a paper exercise of saying, right, well, what external services are we using, and which contractors have access to our crown jewels, and where are the reports of their integrity? Where are the reports of their security posture? And how are we going to get more visibility into what these guys are doing, what vulnerabilities they're bringing in, what possible cracks there are between them and us? All of these are really, really interesting discussion points for understanding this whole process. Let's go and discover assets. Let's go and audit these things. Let's detect them. That's fine inside of a business. It's fine inside of the enclave that we're familiar with. But remember now that the concept of the corporate perimeter is fast eroding. There is no more perimeter. Yes, it's fine to have firewalls to go out onto the internet and to prevent traffic from coming back in and all that kind of thing. Firewalls internally. But the challenge with that is tracking what happens there and knowing where all this data comes and goes. So let's talk very briefly about SANs and SAN's top 20. Those 20 critical controls. Okay, they're not managed by SAN anymore, but most people understand the moniker attributed to them. So number one is discover your assets. How am I going to go and find where all of my things are? And by things, I'm just saying things that contain data, things that talking about just static stuff. We're talking about data in motion. Where is all my intellectual property going? From which to which system is this data being transferred? And let's go and find those systems and audit them. Let's go and make sure that they're set up correctly. Let's go and make sure that all of these things that we know about that are transacting data, whether they're storage area networks or whether they're routers or whether they're iPads for that matter, we want to know about every single one of them, and we want to know what their security posture is, that we can use it as a map. As our global security posture. So number 3, scan all assets for known vulnerabilities and measure state of compliance. Log all events, number 4. So this comes back to what I was saying earlier on. The challenge that organizations have is knowing when a breach has happened, knowing when something's been taken. Even the NSA didn't know that old Eddie Snowden, well, young Eddie Snowden, I call it, had access and did take a whole treasure trove of documents. Yes, it was fine for them to go back after everything had happened and say, oh, look, yeah, that's where he took them from. Wow, how come we didn't notice that? Logging is a crucial aspect in securing the business, and it's all too often overlooked. And very often we come across customers who say, yeah, we're logging everything. There's a log server there in the corner. And yeah, what do you do with that? Well, we occasionally just go and trawl through the logs. That's fine if you know what you're looking for, but how do we know what's changed? Again, it comes back to that whole cycle of knowing when things have changed. There are some other aspects here which are sort of less impactful than the first 4 or 5 of the top 20. But what we could say is, if we're sniffing on the wire of all of the transactions that are happening inside of our network, we'll very often understand where there have been unusual traffic flows. And when we're pulling all this stuff into logging systems, then very often we can we can correlate that with large segments of data which have been transferred, or indicators of compromise can be set up. So that's what IOC means, the indicators of compromise. So what we're looking for here are just clear, unusual communications. We're looking for evidence of command and control, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But the fundamental thing is do we have a patch management system to go and look at new vulnerabilities and be able to what's the right word, track the patching cycles, be able to graph it, be able to trend it out and say, are all of my vulnerabilities being patched in X number of days, 30, 60, 90 days, or whatever the decided upon number is. Yeah, so you might say, all right, well, 1 week for critical patches and 30 days for less critical stuff. Being able to identify those things, crucial. So let's have a look. And I said that I would try and identify some of the tools that we can bring to the table to help with this challenge of identifying where malware actors have been busy and how we can make use of intelligence that's out there on the internet in order to underscore the work that we're doing as a business, and I'm talking about customers now, to try and lock down all of the assets that we have. So malware detection in Tenable solutions is enabled by threat intelligence feeds from two broad sources. Built in, so what we're saying is these threat intelligence sources are built into the Tenable solutions for free. They're already in Nessus, they're already in Passive, they're already in our log systems. And it enables customers to detect advanced malware using a variety of indicators of compromise. So there might be malware indicators, command and control connections. There might be plain reputation of processes, and we provide this through agreements with Reversing Labs and ThreatGrid, and also a very clever approach called Internet Identity. And the impact of that is already in the product. So it's up to the security guys who deploy tools from Tenable to make good use of that source of data for that threat intelligence. So when we talk about on-premise integrations, this is the second broad type of threat intelligence sources. On-premise are those that aren't built into Tenable solutions, and they're partner products that we already work with. So customers will need to go and set up a feed or purchase a license or whatever it is, and deploy these products on or off-premise to get threat intelligence. The cool ones is the current inline sandbox that clearly will come from the guys like FireEye, and another one which is more of a crowdsourced supplier is Threat Connect, and they're both capable of supplying threat intelligence into the business so that we have more visibility and have more clarity on where the indicators of compromise are coming from. So when I talk about reputation, we're talking about IP addresses, we're talking about domain names, URLs, all those kind of things. Now, this capability has been in Nessus for a very, very long time. The evidence of a machine perhaps being involved in a command and control or being involved in some kind of botnet system is easily identifiable using credentials on a target during a scan, and very simply Nessus is able to go and grab a netstat from that target machine, and in working through the information that comes from netstat, whether there's an established connection or whether there wasn't an established connection, identify that as potentially a malware infested site. There are other aspects too in the context of passive vulnerability scanning, knowing that a machine has been talking to a botnet master, shall we say, or things like that. Malware indicators, the running processes, auto runs, registry keys, those kind of things, also already built into Nessus very simply by running queries against this internet identity source, which very simply equates to a DNS query from the Nessus scanner to the externally hosted, Tenable hosted system. And that brings in evidence of known malware running on a system, or indeed just the reputation of running processes. So, for example, you might have an Exchange server, and of course it's running Microsoft Exchange. Now, we'd like to be certain that that is a trusted Microsoft. Think blacklisting and whitelisting of files. You know the guys from Bit9 and those folks? Think along those lines. That's what we're doing with the Nessus scanner. So all of these kind of capabilities are deep inside of the product and have been for some time. Now, clearly, it's an area that Tenable is putting a lot of research into, and together with our business partners, we'll continue to enhance this kind of visibility for our customers. So when we consider this in the context of passive scanning, for example, the passive vulnerability scanner is able to identify, for example, a connection to a predefined site. How does it know that? Well, that comes via updated plugins. These are daily updates. There is a constant flow of information that comes from well-defined sources that goes into the product and that helps customers to identify things when we see evidence of connection. Now, all of this together helps us to build what we would call indicators of compromise. And the way that we do that is by extracting information routinely, for example, onto a dashboard that says, oh, look, we've seen something like this before, or we've seen an incursion into one of these servers, or we've seen a sequence of events. Now we get into the logging aspect. So perhaps now is an appropriate time to switch into sort of platform-related capabilities, and this is a broad outline of what the Tenable solution comprises, and how this equates to the solution that I've been promoting by saying, well, we need to find these machines, we need to audit them, we need to find those vulnerabilities, we need to identify a baseline, we need to know when there are indicators of compromise, where there's been a breach, and so on. All of these components help in that setting up that that visibility. So what I'm saying here is security center there in the middle is the commanding platform of these tools. So we've got a log correlation engine. It's pulling in events from various sources, and hopefully all possible sources. The passive vulnerability scanner, as we move around there, sniffing many connections in many locations. Yeah, all of these things we show one of, but think about many passive vulnerability scanners all dotted around inside and outside of our business, all of them lending intelligence to our quest for information about what's been taken from our business. Ness is the trusted old vulnerability scanner. Well, he's there to go and probe all the systems on the networks, whether they're inside, whether they're outside. If they're outside, we can use Nessus Enterprise Cloud, the Tenable hosted scanner, to go and spray our network infrastructure and find out where the vulnerabilities are there. We can go and audit our apps and so on. But together, all of these components enhance massively the visibility of what's happening inside of our network. So I've talked about Nessus, for example, being able to go into a target machine and enumerate all the known running processes, check all the auto runs, look for trusted and untrusted applications running on targets, and indeed even compare running applications with, if I just switch back for just a second to that previous slide there, 1 billion malware hashes. So that's what we're saying is Nessus has that ability to go and look into those things and query them. Feed all that information back into Security Center, use that with the log correlation engine, correlate that with evidence of connections using the passive vulnerability scanner, know who's been talking to whom. You could even feed the log correlation engine with NetFlow. You could feed it with a feed from an additional client called Tenable Network Monitor, which behaves like NetFlow if you don't have NetFlow on your network. So, broadly speaking, a very cool way of deploying Tenable products to go and pull out information from the network, from our assets, and understand them. So, how do we get to the 100%? Passive vulnerability scanner in strategic parts in the network will tell us about every asset talking on our network. Be it an iPad, be it a server, be it some more unauthorized system, we will know. That's the idea of passively discovering what's going on the network. That's where the 100% comes from. Passive vulnerability scanner talks to Security Center, it uploads its data set periodically, and also tells the log correlation engine things about connections, things about systems on the network, who's talking to who started up an SSL connection, who is sending data out through port 443, thinking or making the admin thinks this is SSL traffic, but meanwhile, it's some kind of other tunnel. What other ports are typically open on network? Port 53, perhaps, port 25. Classic exfiltration points. Passive vulnerability scanner will know when traffic is going down 53. Oh, look, this is not DNS traffic. This is something else arbitrary. We want to know about that. So what we're saying is Tenable continuous monitoring is the only comprehensive solution which takes vulnerability, threat, and compliance data, puts analytics on it to provide continuous visibility for security and IT ops. Now, there's the big sentence. So what we're saying here is we're providing next generation vulnerability management. Next generation? Well, yeah, it's one step ahead of what most people have right now. What we're trying to do is paint a picture of the entire business's security posture through a single solution of a bunch of very cool products. Malware detection. So, in most businesses, there's typically one or two. Occasionally, you'll find 3 different antivirus vendors. Maybe one at the gateway, maybe one on the servers, and maybe a different one on the desktops. Most times, there's only one or two. Now, if I tell you that those 1 billion malware hashes that we were talking about are provided by all known antivirus vendors, how many are there? 30, 50? Nessus can look into all of those. Does that enhance your malware detection? Absolutely. Absolutely. Be sure about that. Because that one piece of malware that one antivirus vendor missed, that all the others picked up, that could just be the one which compromises a network. So together with all of that, let's put some patch monitoring in place. Let's put some KPIs in place, measure our compliance. Let's go into pulling all these logs in. Let's have a look at how our network is behaving. Where's all that coming from? Well, from NetFlow, from passive vulnerability sensing on who's talking to whom and when and how frequently. Oh, Joe logged into the firewall last night at midnight. Well, that's unusual. We'd like to know about that. We also want to know when Mr. CEO brings his new iPad into the business and starts sharing presentations on Dropbox or something like that. So this is where I'm coming from. This is the continuous aspect. This is the broad outline of what Tenable is busy doing. Way, way, way beyond the very simple port scanning that the majority of people think that Nessus is providing for them. Yes, that is the absolute core function of Nessus, but think much more than that. Think big. Go and grab yourself a sandwich, sit down, think about this, and we can have another talk. So just to recap on where Nessus comes from Tenable. We're the creators of the Nessus scanner. We're up in the 400 now of employees. We have operations throughout Asia, Europe, and of course the Americas. More than 24,000 customers, more than 12 years on the go, and the chosen standard for the DoD and many other corporate businesses. So we've got a couple of minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes for a few questions. If anybody has any specific questions that maybe I haven't raised, or maybe things that I've said that have raised more questions than answered any. But all in all, thank you very, very much for joining. By the way, I'm Al Forbes at Tenable.com. If you want to ping me an email, obviously our contact details are on our website at Tenable.com. And I would love to have more discussions with more and more of you, and if you're a partner, then with your customers. So we've got one quick question here. How frequently are the hashes updated? Well, that's an interesting question, because that's why we partner with very clever organizations. These guys, Internet Identity, who collect all of the malware hashes and all those wonderful relationships with the antivirus vendors. Oh, and by the way, when Nessus reports that a file that's been found on the system is potentially unknown or is malware, and the log correlation engine client does that for us as well. When it reports that, it tells us which of the 30 or 50 antivirus vendors are actually reporting this as malware or potentially unwanted application, or whatever people want to call it. But the point that I'm making is that this stuff is their bread and butter. That's their daily task. Those hashes and all that, they're updated all day long. And the reason I can say that is that when we go and query it using Nessus, that is a real-time query. It's not simply based on something that was good knowledge 24 hours ago or 1 week ago, as is the strategy of some. It is current. Those kind of queries, they're DNS queries, they're active, they're current, and they're real time. So anyway, that was a very quick question. I see we're on 45 minutes, and really appreciate your attendance today, and thank you for all of your attention.